So this is the seat of a rocking chair. You can see the front leg joinery and the back leg joinery. This is my joint that I kind of made, and back here is a Hal Taylor Maloof joint. The process I'm going to show you is what I use on the entire rocking chair. I've had a lot of questions on how I get my seat nice and smooth, so I thought, you know, if I talk about this particular part, the seat, you can take what I've shown you here and apply it to other parts or other seats or whatever. It's just kind of the idea of how do I get something really smooth and somewhat polished on a curved surface, because it is really difficult. Like, if you actually look at some of these curves, they're pretty complicated because you're basically going down and down, and the angles change as you move across the seat. And there's a few processes that I've used over the years to try and get things really smooth, and I feel like maybe some of them might help you kind of get surfaces flat and get the undulated surfaces removed. I do plan to do more videos on the other parts of a rocker, because there are transitions like in a front or rear leg joint that can be really difficult to get smooth. So I plan to do some videos on that. But for today, we'll just focus on the seat of a chair, because that's a pretty common part of a piece of furniture that I think most people can say, well, it's pretty hard to get it flat and a nice curve and to get it to feel smooth. So I'll walk you through my process. I guess the first thing to really talk about is, first of all, this is a rocking chair seat. It's made out of curly cherry. I'm going to use the Festool RO150. It's a very good sander. I have the soft pad interface on this sander, and I also have a Mirka sanding interface that I feel is really kind of a good addition to my sander. It's a very thin interface pad made by Mirka, and it sits between the Festool pad and the sandpaper. Now, if my sandpaper tears and I wreck the next surface below it, I'm going to just wreck this $10 Mirka surface pad. This Festool pad is about $60 to $70 depending on where I get it, so I don't want to wreck this. So this guy is $10. I got it on Amazon, and it works really well to protect this. I'm going to start out with 40 grit sandpaper. I'm going to move to 80, 150, 220, 320, and then I'm going to use this really nice Festool Platin 400 foam pad, and it works really well. I really like it, and that's what I kind of use to actually polish the wood. Okay, I don't normally use this on most things, because once you get up to 400, you know, you're going to affect your oil penetration into the wood. But for a rocking chair, I use this. I love it. It's a very, very important part of what I do. What you see currently on this chair was achieved using the Kutzall Extreme Grinding Disc. Okay, I'll show it to you. So I have my Makita grinder, and I have my Extreme Kutzall dish. Okay, and this wheel is very aggressive. I love it. It's a really, really important part of everything I do. Now, I started with this guy, and then I finished it up with the original coating, which is a little less aggressive, to just kind of clean things up. But what I do, and I'll show you in the video, is I have a seat, I mark holes, I drill down certain depths. So I drill 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and 1/2 an inch. I grind down to that, and I actually leave these little marks in here. You'll see little pen marks, and those little marks are where my depth holes, I haven't quite ground down to the point where I've removed it completely. So I actually, when I make my depth holes, I leave these little marks, so when I'm sanding, I know generally I've hit close to where I need to be. Okay, so what you see right here was achieved using this and then an original coating, and now I'm going to do the next step in the shaping of the seat using the RO150 with the various sandpapers. Okay, so what I have discovered is this surface using the cut saw is fairly undulated. There are a lot of kind of high spots, low spots. It's quite a rough surface. Okay, and I used to come in and really grind hard on here to try and get it flat. But what I found over the years is when I'm using the 40 grit and the sander, I have it in Rotex mode, so it's like a grinder, so it doesn't, it's not like an orbital where it kind of changes how it's spinning. This is a constant spinning mode, so it's, like I say, it's like a grinder with a 40 grit. And what I do is I use a really aggressive grit sandpaper, but I really just kind of coast across the surface. All I'm trying to do with the 40 grit is to get things somewhat smooth. So I don't tend to push really hard, because if I push really hard, I'll actually dig grooves in there. So what I want to do is I actually just want to almost just coast across the surface of this entire seat, just really lightly. Now, I will get more aggressive and I will use more downward force as I move to 80 and 150. Okay, so now I went around kind of dragging it away from the lines. I'm gonna start going around the chair with 80 grit now. And what I wanna do is I wanna have a sweeping motion away from the edges and the middle here where the pommel is high. So I wanna sweep away from it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the sander to go this way. But the other thing too is your sander can kind of undulate up and down as you go downward. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll actually bring the sander across like this. And this is actually a fairly good radius for this particular seat. So what I'll do is I'll go down, which will kind of smooth it this way. But then what I'll also do is I'll bring it across, which will smooth kind of the curve. So if I feel this with my hand, I can feel there's some bumps going this way. So what I'll do is I'll take the sander and drag it across. Okay, so I'm going to do those two different motions. Okay, I just went over the seat with 80 grit. I was sweeping away from the lines down to the center, but I also went around with the sander on its edge to kind of get rid of some of the ripples that you get along the edge going to the bottom of the seat. So that worked fairly well. I'm always using my hand to like feel the surface to see if I'm nice and smooth. And if I am, I can move on to the next grit. So I feel like this is pretty good. I'm going to now move on to 150. I'm moving on to 220 and 320, and now is the time to be really honest with yourself. I know that sounds strange, but if you run your hand across the chair seat and you feel some bumps, they're only going to get worse from this point on, because as you start to get this seat more and more smooth, those little bumps will become a lot more noticeable. So run your hand across and make sure to come across too, like go in this direction and this direction. Make sure that it's nice and smooth. 220 for me does tend to carve still. Like if I feel some little bumps, I feel pretty confident that I'll be able to get it out with 220. But for me, 320 and then 400, it's almost just polishing the surface mostly. So I don't find that 320 gets rid of any bumps. It more just smooths over the bumps. So I'm going to use 220 now, and during this grit, I'm going to do my best to make sure there are absolutely no bumps. If I do find a bump, so if I find that there's a bump somewhere, I'll take my sander and I'll really try to focus on that area. And I'm not going to push really hard, because when I push hard, obviously this pad can squish and it'll move to kind of conform to the surface. So if I push really hard, it'll tend to dig in the low spots and it won't quite take off the highs. So I actually go across the bumps quite lightly. And let's say there's a bump, I'll draw it on. Let's just say there's a bump kind of here. This is actually a tough area, because what you're doing is this is kind of your long grain, but as you curve up, well, this is actually partly end grain. Like your end grain is actually sitting here, right? So it's actually a lot harder than this. So there's a transition point in there where you're going from almost softer long grain stuff to end grain. So you tend, at least for myself, I tend to get a lot of bumps in here. But let's say I have a bump right there. So what I'm going to do is basically hold my sander in a way that it's just going to touch that bump, and I'm just going to smooth over it nice and easy and kind of just drag it across. I want to make sure that I'm not pushing here or pushing here. I want to make sure that I'm just getting the sander to touch that one spot, and I'll keep feeling it to make sure it goes away. So as I do the 220 when I'm sanding, you'll probably see me do that. I'll be feeling around, I'll see if there's a bump, and then I'll kind of focus in on it and just try to feather it out a little bit. And that's the other thing too. My curve here is a different radius than the curve here. So what I'll do is I'll actually, here I'll hold my sander so it conforms to that curve. But when I come over here, I just have to hold my sander slightly different, to get this proper angle. Just finished 220. Now for me is a really good time. I run my hands all across it. I make sure it's nice and smooth. The other thing I like to check is everything kind of staying even? Like if I go to the pommel here in the middle, is it even on each side? Or the amount that I've taken off on each edge, on each of these edges, are they even? Does the back actually feel even across, So this is a time when I really stop and say, okay, well, how is everything looking? Are the edges consistent side to side? Does the back feel nice and smooth? And is this pommel kind of even on each side? Like is the angle at which it dives away from the middle the same? So I like to take some time, make sure I'm good, making little touch-ups. Now I'm going to move on to 320 and 400. Okay, I just finished 320 and 400. I hope you can see the difference from what we started at. You can see the shine and you can see the luster that the 400 gives. Now, the reason I do this now, why I finish it to 400, is because if you notice, all the work we're doing is kind of it kind of happens all around the side and the back. Now, if you have your leg back here, it gets really hard to access some of these areas. So I like to finish the seat first, and I know a lot of other guys do the same. It just makes it a little bit easier. Now, are we done? Not necessarily. This chair is gonna be probably another month or so, so there won't be any finish on the seat for quite a while. So I expect, as moisture kind of hits this open grain, I probably will get some bumps in there. You know, in another month, I'll probably have to run over this again. I'll probably maybe skim it with 220, 320, 400 again. Maybe I'll just do 320 if it feels good. But, you know, and as you're putting it together, you'll get glue on the joints and you'll drop stuff on it. You might nick it, all kinds of stuff, you know, so lots can happen. But generally speaking, the seat is pretty much done. Probably have to do some little touch-ups as we go. But overall, it's looking really good. I'm really happy with it. It's very smooth, and don't really think I can capture the smoothness and the luster of the seat that well in video, but it looks very nice. It feels very smooth. The figure's starting to pop, and I'm really quite happy with it. And that's the same process that I will use on the entire chair. Once I put the legs back, headrest, rockers on, I will shape it with Cutsall. Then I'll use a rasp, and then I'll go through that exact same sanding process, except I'll get my RO90 involved and use the 150, and I'll just keep working at it, and I'll do basically the same process to the entire chair. Okay. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it.